And that balance between moving fast and scale without losing quality is always one of the biggest challenges, and is one of the challenges where you apply technology the most.
It's really this balance between innovation and trust, right? You want to innovate, but you also can't break that consumer trust.
If you want to know all prices, sizes, logistic procedures, all that is super important information that actually costs money. So having that information, the right information at the right time, is super important.
At least the business adoption is going to be limited by the fact that there's an inherent miss somewhere in that process that takes a very high level of expertise to ensure that miss is caught.
Today we sat down with Rafael Carranza, who's currently at PitchBook but has an amazing background, and someone who's spent his entire career proving that content isn't just marketing fluff. It's actually the invisible infrastructure that makes or breaks digital experiences.
And if you think content strategy is just about writing better copy, Rafael's going to completely rewire how you think about this. He breaks down why trust is the foundation of everything, why companies don't buy software, people do, and why most organizations are completely unprepared for the AI era.
He walks us through his journey from working at a wire service during the dot-com boom, when they had to figure out this whole internet thing, to building content platforms at Microsoft that reached hundreds of millions of people, to now creating decision-making systems at Amazon.
And here's something I loved. Rafael gets into why AI hallucinations are actually a governance problem, not a technology problem. He explains why you can't just plug in an LLM into your content library and expect magic. You need clean data, clear permissions, and someone who actually knows what accurate looks like.
He also drops this truth bomb that most people miss. Frictionless isn't about technology or processes. It's about how deeply you understand the customer. Which sounds obvious until you realize that most companies are optimizing their systems without ever really knowing who is on the other side.
If you've ever wondered why your content is converting, why your AI implementation feels messy, or why trust keeps coming up in every digital conversation, this episode is going to connect a lot of those dots for you that you didn't quite know were related.
Let's get into it. First of all, welcome.
Thank you, Nick and Chuck, for the invitation.
So you started out in journalism, and so talk a little bit about that, sort of that early start, and how did journalism influence the way you approach today product and content?
Definitely. Actually, my background is in business, but I started my career working for a news agency during the dot-com period. It was a very interesting time when actually content became key for many of the companies that wanted to create their online presence. So I was working for a wire service, one of the 4 largest news agencies in the world. The name of this company was EFE. It's the same that Reuters, AFP, and the AP. So they basically were in a really good position because they had people all over the world, basically creating content every single day. And from one moment to the other, we have the internet just booming and having thousands of websites wanted to have live content in their websites. So I joined, during that time I joined the organization, and they invited me to be part of EFE. And my main role was to develop products for this new internet thing that was happening and growing, and how we can continue packaging and creating new services for content. And during that time, what I learned is that content is at the base of many things. Even for that company, their traditional customers were publishers, newspapers. But then I also realized that the government was using us, that we have many entities that were using our content, radio, TV, because they wanted to be informed of what was happening around the world. But then our content became a source. It was a raw material for all these web services that didn't have people to write the stories that we were producing every single day, and they needed that in volume and content. So one of my customers during this time was actually Microsoft. Microsoft owned this network of sites called MSN. And for them, we developed many, many solutions and products that they start using for the website. With time, when Microsoft launched a new project, someone that was working in that project told me, "Hey, Rafa, we are going to be changing the way we approach our websites, the way that we are communicating with our customers. Would you be interested in seeing an opportunity here with us?" And I joined Microsoft at that time. So that was the jumping from pure journalism. I was not an editor, but I was very, very embedded in how we were creating content or information for different scenarios.
Thinking about your your work early in content operations, what did that teach you about user trust? What did you learn in that journey?
That's a really good question, Chuck, because I will say that I've been in several organizations, 3 big companies, and when you talk about content and using content, one of the key words is trust. Actually, we always talk about values that happen in Microsoft, you know, the values that we have in Amazon, but trust was at the core of content. Content can be used for many things, right? Depending on the user case. But at the end of the day, you have information that needs to be reliable, and you can build reliability that you're building creates trust for your customers, right? And that's connected with your brand. That's true for my current company, PitchBook. They have built a brand around data and the trust of that data, and important that that data is for people that is making very important financial decisions. Was true also for the people that was serving in Amazon when they were designing the product they were going to be selling in the platform for both for seller and vendor, and was also true for the publishers I was working with that were publishing their information in MSN to reaching millions of users around the world. If you don't have trust, if you don't have that reliability that is helping, that is basically backing up your offer to the market, then you don't have a business, right? So trust is potentially the most important thing that you want to create for a content operation.
Trust and reliability is key across many different, I guess, verticals of business, really, when you just trivialize it. So, but when you're talking about content, that's an interesting aspect, especially when you're talking about like articles and news content and images and reliability, that this event is properly documented. And I could certainly see where that importance comes from. It's an interesting parallel to what our normal thought of frictionlessness is, because traditionally we're thinking about, okay, you have a customer that is an individual with which is accessing some digital space. In this case, this is more the trust and frictionlessness of being able to share news stories in an accurate and truthful manner. And that's a pretty cool analogy for us.
For the news organization, for the news service, they basically rely on their brand. So the reason that they had a business was that even when, user-generated content was pumping everywhere, and you can create content and you distribute it, what you're offering in your website or what you're offering in your newspaper matters, right? Who is writing it, how it's being created. That was a key part of the value proposition for that company, and it's been across all the organizations I've been working for.
So, Rafael, at some point, did Microsoft make the decision that they weren't a media company? Because when they started MSN, they were trying to be a media company, right? Was there a shift in strategy?
It definitely was a change. So at the beginning, MSN operated like a traditional portal. And basically the approach was to create their own original content. Actually, when I joined the company, they were still working towards that goal of being able to create your own original content. But as the company evolved and we got new leadership, Satya Nadella took the helm of the organization, the focus was more on Microsoft is a technology company. We should be focusing our strengths, and we are a platform. So let's use our platform that is reaching hundreds of millions of people around the world. And instead of creating content ourselves, which we don't compete really well, let's use our platform and invite people that actually create content, and let's do this business together. And that's what we did. The main project that I was worked there was about opening or bringing new publishers into the content platform. So what you see today when you open your browser in Edge and you see a lot of stories and news there, that was part of that project. So I will say that Microsoft optimized not only MSM, but across many canvases, their surfaces, because they realized that news create engagement, and bringing the right information at the right time was important. And that was, and it continues to be a very important advertising business for the organization.
And when you think about the organizations that you've worked for with Microsoft and Amazon, a lot of organizations think of content in terms of marketing, but when do you see content stop being marketing and becoming more part of the product?
Yeah, actually, content is part of the product, is part of the service. It's an integral part of your product. When you are creating a product, you want people to know how to use it. And beyond selling the idea and marketing how this, or creating awareness about something that you are creating, you actually need to explain people how to use it, right? So to be super specific, when you are Amazon and you are supporting thousands of sellers that are selling in your platform, there's a lot of rules that they need to understand, right? Where you can buy, in which countries, what are the limitations, if you want to know all prices, sizes, logistic procedures, all that is super important information that actually costs money. So having that information, the right information at the right time, is super important, and that's also a form of content. You can use content, as we were doing for Microsoft, for engaging people, for having them like reading about something that's important that is changing their lives, and then you can use that as a way of monetizing through advertising, or you can bring content in a way that is helping your most important partners to make decisions on how they should be engaging with your products or services, right? Or you can use content to help people to navigate their way in your platform and solve their own problems with your content. And this is, now that we are getting into the AI era, content is also getting that important role into solving questions. Like all AI generation tools, what they are trying to do is using content for answering questions that the customer wants to know, right?
So, how would you recommend that companies operationalize their content at scale without losing quality? And especially, you kind of touched a little bit on AI, so maybe weave that in as well.
It's very challenging, right? Especially when you are talking about companies with the dimensions and scale as Amazon or Microsoft. They both internally and externally, they manage thousands and thousands of pieces of content, right? And that balance between moving fast and scale without losing quality is always one of the biggest challenges, and is one of the challenges where you apply technology the most. But beyond technology, I will say that having clear governance structures and strategy is important. You need to know what your content is about. You need to really understand where you are placing your content, how you're tagging it, how content relates to each other, depending on the area. We just talk about marketing, logistics, support. There are even terms that exist within a big company as Amazon or Microsoft that are maybe used differently, depending how you engage with customers. So you need to align those for your communications internal and externally. But now, even more importantly, as you are creating AI systems that are supposed to be intelligent, but they need to know the context on how information works and what a specific term means, so they can bring the right answer to the right customer for the right situation, right? It sounds easy, but it's actually very complex. You hear all this evolution about RAG and how people are like leveraging large language models, supplementing that with their own way of bringing the information into those systems. That's connected with that.
And one of the things that people talk about all the time when we think about AI are hallucinations, or making up answers and things like that. In a large corporate environment like that, how do you mitigate that business risk, and how do you build the guardrails you need to make sure that you're not putting out content that's inaccurate?
Yeah, that's actually one of the biggest priorities, and potentially one that requires a lot of effort. Like all these content governance parameters are super important. What I see about how companies are experimenting into AI. It goes a lot into production, improving productivity, improving the way that you move faster. But at some point, people get into, yeah, let's generate content. Let's allow the LLM just to do that, to write stuff, right? But if you don't have this foundation, when you are telling these systems what content is being reviewed, that is accurate, that is vetted, that you have the right governance, that you have the right permissions access, and you have all that set for your systems to work, what you're gonna get is potentially a lot of confusion, right? Also, it sounds easy, but when you're talking about potential data lakes or databases that have thousands or hundreds of thousands of articles, having that information fresh is not very easy, right? So you do need to do an effort auditing your content, cleaning stuff that is outdated, and that takes some time, but that's something that everyone needs to do their due diligence to prepare their content to be able to provide a really good AI solution.
So, Nick, I think my favorite retailer and I need therapy.
You and another website?
I've waited 5 seconds for it to load. 5. I could have gone and brewed coffee.
That's a quick coffee maker, first of all, but that sounds like a performance issue to me.
Yeah, instead of communicating, it just spun.
So you left, I'm sure. Classic abandonment issue due to latency.
Exactly. And that's why the Lowe's SRE team built site speed targets with Blue Triangle, so their users don't get ghosted by loading icons.
This is 5 steps to faster pages and fewer heartbreaks, all in the context of improved experience and improved revenue.
In fact, we turned it into a free playbook.
It's like a couples therapy for your digital experience, for you and your website, Chuck.
So be sure to grab the 5-step site speed target playbook at bluetriangle.com/playbook.
Because love is patient, but users aren't. Something that I did recently, because Windows 10 end of life, and then I had to upgrade to Windows 11, but my computer wouldn't allow me based on hardware. So I decided that rather than replacing the computer, I wanted to go to Linux. And so I'm not a super tech savvy, super like that kind of guy, but AI helped me be that. However, what I noticed in the process of doing this is sometimes the steps were wrong, and then you'd have to say, hey, this didn't work. And it would say, oh, and then it would have to backtrack to like the 3 times before, and then it would pick it back up. So I imagine in content, the same basic problem could exist. So if you create something, you could be 3 or 4 iterations after, but then you're looking back up to a prompt that, went a little haywire, and that's giving you something that is ultimately misaligning basically the way everything lands for your customer. So to me, that's the biggest risk with AI, that at least the business adoption is going to be limited by the fact that there's an inherent miss somewhere in that process that takes a very high level of expertise to ensure that miss is caught. And so I think that's part of where, you hear a lot of people say AI is not out here to replace a job. I mean, it kind of is, but in the truth of it, it's really more those that use AI in the most successful manner by ensuring that those hallucinations get caught and ensuring that you don't get down into a web of lies unintentionally. I mean, I could imagine, back to the AP as the source. If AP's writing AI-based articles with which a bunch of different news outlets pick up and distribute, now all of a sudden what happens if there's a hallucination sitting in the middle of that could be detrimental. So it's to me that's where hallucinations are gonna really start to hamper the business application. But the personal application, my little example about rebooting my machine to Linux it's funny. Like I go through a process and it deletes the drive off of my, true story, it deletes the drive off of my computer, and then I have to tell it to go fix it.
Gen AI It's magical. I think that you're right. It's basically helping you to organize information, especially at a large scale, very quickly, right? But it's very important that you know what you're talking about. That's really, really important in terms that you know that the output that you're receiving from the generative AI and the LLM is accurate. And that's where you have this human element. It's really important for you to catch. And also, I will say, and I will always recommend, assuming that AI and all the LLMs are not deterministic, right? By nature, they will always give you a different response every time that you're asking it, because that's the way it works. They function by vectors, they relate information and they put that together. That doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It works, but you need to kind of be very, to know your parameters, and you need to assume that the LLM, if you are not telling very specifically what you want, it may hallucinate, right? So sometimes you may need to tell, hey, if you don't have information about this topic, state it and don't add anything else. And that's there are a lot of very good practices that are coming as people is doing more and more with these things, that also demonstrate that it's good to have this combination between scaling with an eye, improving processes, analyzing information very quickly, checking sentiment very quickly, and then as you're generating new knowledge, that you have this compensation between the human and the machine to scale more, right?
What strikes me as a topic that we talked about before was trust. This is when you start thinking about AI and start thinking about the accuracy of information that you're getting, it's really this balance between innovation and trust, right? You want to innovate, but you also can't break that consumer trust.
For all the companies I work for, trust is one of the main things. If you lose trust or faith with your customers, you are done.
I know that today you're very much on the B2B side in your role at PitchBook, and then you were sort of B2C in the past. How do you see those being different when you think about content? How does content and how does the creating or removing friction differ between B2C and B2B?
I've been doing that for different user cases. So when I was doing B2C, was more on the marketing engagement side. So it was more about very large scale, like basically creating experiences for hundreds of millions of people. And the goal was for using that approach or that engagement for monetization, right? When you move into the B2B space, the scale is different. Even with a large company like Amazon, like you are not reaching hundreds of millions of people, you are potentially reaching thousands of customers or partners. So the scale is a factor. It's larger, more complex. You will always go into data-driven decisions. So when you're doing that for consumer, you really need to go. Data is huge, and it's different for the B2B case. Now, I will say that where things are moving on the content space, the whole concept about having the right content at the right time for the right situation is similar for both scenarios, right? So this is about frictionless, which is about reducing effort to your customer, to your partner. So the way of doing that is really understanding who your partner, your customer is. And the more you know about them, the more you know what is really important and what's the path they are in their journey and what is really relevant for them right now. That's really going to reduce the friction. So I will say that across B2B and B2C and technology and AI, what is happening and has been happening in the last potential 15 years is like really fine-tuning how we understand what is happening with our customers and clients, and what is the right type of information we can use to engage with them when they need that information, right? That's the whole science, and all this connection between content and technology is happening at that dimension.
So what happens when content fails in those high stake environments, especially where you're talking hundreds of millions? What's an example of where you saw content fail, and how do you address that?
It can scale very quickly. I cannot share details because there are, of course, some of those things are private and I cannot share situations, but you can imagine that for a news stories to go wrong, that could have like really big implications, like people making decisions or even creating a situation in a country, right? When you have a fake story or something that is not there. I've seen situations where a simple thing, like a notification that should have gone to a group of customers or partners, didn't go through correctly. And that potentially became a snowball that went into media, that created government involved, and people trying to sue a larger company for that situation because the company was not following a specific directive that was supposed to be happening. And that could be connected potentially with a wrong communication that didn't go through on the right time. I can tell you an email can generate a big situation that could cost millions of dollars. Millions of dollars to your customers in impact for not being informed about something that was changing and that was really important, and also millions of dollars to your organization to fix it. Those are real. I cannot give details, but those are real cases that can happen and happen, right? People don't think a lot about content until it fails. Content is there. We have the assumption that like, everyone can create content. But until you have a situation where that content goes wrong, and you'll see that beyond the cases that I've seen in my professional life, you can see these huge demands happening in media because of a comment, because someone said something that shouldn't be saying, right? Like really large amounts of money. And the implications where content goes wrong, it could be very costly.
So one of the things we've talked about over various episodes is the idea between intentional friction and accidental friction, and that sometimes, slowing users down actually improves the experience. And this is something that we talked about in our prep call. Where have you seen removing friction backfire? Because we're all about removing friction, right? When have you seen that actually backfire and create a worse experience?
I will say that the only situations that I may relate is like when you are, but this is more operational. This is more operational where you are dealing with huge amounts of requests, processes, or things that you need to be doing. Then in those cases, introduction of friction helps the process. And that friction means that the friction is that you cannot provide a solution for absolutely everyone, right? You get into triaging, you get into prioritizing. Those are the only situations, but that's more internal operational, where you actually create some friction and that friction is positive. I will say that the other one, now that we are talking about it, will be around quality, Chuck. Like in that discussion about keeping a very high quality bar versus moving fast, you do want to create friction to give more weight for quality. So even if something needs to go out and be communicated faster, you need to have the backbone to push back or even not doing it if the quality of the communication is not there. So that will be, it's very operational again, but those will be situations where I see that creating that friction benefits the customer or benefits the way that you operate.
So, Rafael, what's one widely held belief about frictionless digital experiences that you think people get wrong, that you fundamentally disagree with?
I will say that the main fundamental one is that frictionless is about how you improve your processes. It's more about, from my perspective, and how you really understand your customer. How deeply you know what is important for them, how connected you are to what's the journey that they have and how things connect in their way. It's not about the technology. It's not about the AI. It's not about the magic answer on doing things faster. It's about really, really understanding and taking the time to understand who is on the other side, who you are serving.
Well, that's great. So, Rafael, what's the best way for somebody to get in touch with you if they want to continue the conversation? Where can they find you?
They can find me on LinkedIn. I post topics from time to time. I'm someone that is always talking about content operations, especially around AI, and you can reach me there.
Awesome. Well, this has been a great conversation. We appreciate you tuning into the Frictionless Experience. And if you haven't checked it out, be sure to check out our newsletter where we go deeper on topics from the podcast. Be sure and sign up for that. And meanwhile, you can always get in touch with me on LinkedIn. Or Nick. I am at Chuck Moxley, and Nick is
at In Paladino.